This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter for MacVoices viewers and listeners. Visit MacVoices.com, look for the blue box in our sidebar, and subscribe. Hi, I'm Chuck Joyner, and MacVoices is in San Francisco for WWDC and the AltConference. I'm here with Orta Therox, talking about CocoaPods and his impressions of WWDC. Oh, yeah. It's great to see you.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for stopping by.
Oh, well, I mean, there's so many other people around as well. You must be, like, getting so many cool interviews.
It's been great talking to so many people, but the funny thing is some people are still shy. They hesitate to, talk on camera. I don't know why.
I don't know what that is about either, to be honest.
Yeah.
You should have a big sign that says, I am really friendly. Come take a seat next to me.
Well, hopefully anybody who's seen the show knows that we don't do interrogations here. So for the listeners who don't know and the viewers who don't know, what is CocoaPods?
So here's the thing. CocoaPods had this beautiful tagline, but now it's changed, and I still haven't decided what the new one is. But this is the thing, because it used to be the kind of Objective-C dependency manager and community for open source. But now we can't call it that, and it doesn't really feel right to call it the Swift community, and so it's more like, I don't know, the Objective-C, it's so ingrained to me, the Cocoa dependency manager for handling internal projects and external open source. So it deals with like pulling in code from somewhere else and putting it into your Xcode project in an external place so that you don't have to have it all intermingling with your own code. Okay.
So you're clearly you work with a developer audience. That is what you
purely developer audience.
But I think the interesting thing about this, it's kind of like how the sausage gets made. A lot of people out there have probably had the benefits of your applications, and your services without them even knowing
the core foundations. Yeah. And to some extent, you don't need to. I mean, all it does in general is it creates a second workspace, and it creates a single static library that everything links to, and that's it. So all the changes that it is to your user project is adding an xcconfig file, which most people probably don't even know what an xcconfig file is anyway, so there's different levels of abstraction, and I think like CocoaPods is a good level of abstraction for people, for every different level. But for me, as someone who's done Xcode, and even when it was called Project Builder, I still don't know all of the internals.
So the big question for somebody like you here is Swift.
Swift.
How do you feel about Swift? Do you yes, no, maybe?
I as a man who loves to work in Ruby, Swift to me just is like the most exciting thing to happen to the Objective-C world in so long now. Oh,
that's so great to hear that it's getting such a positive reception.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Is it because it's a more modern language?
I think so. And I feel like they've done a really good job of trying to bridge the gap of the porting. So you can look at Swift code and more or less read it as well as the Objective-C code, and they have a similar kind of thing like when they did Arc. You didn't have to go and learn new memory management tools. It was just implicit because the language has these constraints on it. So you always use an init method, so they always know what an init method's memory management should work. And it's the same thing with Swift, whereby your init functions will instantly turn into the same kind of init functions if you're using them in Objective-C as you are in Swift. So if you're writing one library, you only have to write one API. And I think that kind of thing is really elegant going forwards, because we're all going to be not rewriting applications in Swift. I think there'll be a lot of time where you'll be incrementally doing it. Right. And I think they've added support for that very well, because it would have been very easy for them to have just said Swift only from now on in, and making sure that legacy stuff already still works. I think it's a really fascinating aspect of how they've handled the Swift transition.
Now, you're the first person who has used the term legacy for some of this. Do you foresee a time when everything will move to Swift?
Yeah.
How quickly do you think that transition will take place?
I mean, I think probably from maybe in the next 6 months, every new project will be Swift. From that point on, I expect slowly libraries will change their fundamental API. And at CocoaPods, we're having a discussion about this right now, about whether to automatically from now say, this is a Swift project. Because that means that I think you're going to start exposing the functionality of your library different through Swift, because you have access to new tools like returning multiple values, or like the way that you can handle blocks in general in Swift is quite different and interesting. And I think that the way that you write your APIs externally and publicly are going to be different. So you're going to start seeing shifts in like languages or frameworks that previously you wouldn't have. So my guess right now is that AF networking is probably going to get a full-on rewrite in Swift. And then that will have a completely new API and maybe even a new name. Because it will feel so different to the old AF networking that it will not actually be AF networking anymore. But it will be a completely new thing. And that change will mean that everyone will slowly start doing this. So if you're writing a big library, I bet within a year or two you'll have a completely different API.
Okay, now, we've been talking a lot about the developer stuff and what's under the hood.
Yeah.
Now let's pull back into the passenger seat. For the average user who's out there going through the App Store and looking for applications, what does this mean to them?
Less crashes, more speed, and I think those are kind of the core fundamentals of things that people really do want but would never specifically state. You get 1-star reviews as like, this app crashes, and ideally a lot of the syntax in Swift makes it a lot easier to do a lot of the kind of language constructs that cause crashes further on, makes it easier to catch. Things like adding the question mark after variable names or exclamation points for when they have to be created beforehand. I think there's a lot of tools there that we can use to make more stable and supposedly, but I've never compared, faster apps according to the Apple keynote earlier.
Do you think this could be a precursor to some of the new stuff we keep hearing about and maybe even fantasizing about? And I'm thinking an app store for the Apple TV, or an iWatch, whatever that means, whatever that implementation might come out to be.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fascinating thing. There's a lot of like good cues to this now. We're seeing a lot more Apple TV apps, like just in general on the Apple TV. Right. And I think that's probably them testing the waters a bit. And I've never done an Apple TV app or not had the chance to talk to anyone about like how much that's changed over time.
Right.
But I'd be really interested in seeing like, is the API starting to stabilize? Because I would like it. I built an app that could really do with being able to show on, like, have an Apple TV interface from scratch instead of just using like AirPlay. And it's nice that they've also done that for the Mac as well, so you can AirPlay over on that. But I'd love to see all of this happening.
Yeah, we all do it, and I'm as guilty as the next guy. This is what they announced two days ago, and I'm already saying, well, what could it mean
in the future?
Yeah, because you want to prognosticate. I don't know why.
Well, what's your opinion on this?
I don't know enough about. I know enough about programming to talk a little bit to you.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it to comment.
Okay.
The only thing I can say is that looking just at the lines of code that seem to drop out with Swift. That would seem to mean a lot more compact code that could run on some of these devices that may be less powerful or maybe not.
I mean, if you're getting faster languages, it's the same with the stuff about the Metal announcement where they're saying, we're just reducing the amount of API work you have to do to like do something super fast.
Yeah.
My opinion, if you're going to build something for like watches or small devices, you need that kind of bare metal API in order to actually save battery life and to build something that could be instantly responsive to like gestures from a device. So I think that's definitely in the direction, and the sort of stuff that they're doing with Interface Builder, which is like the way of creating GUIs, is now very freeform. Where previously it was like you had an iPhone or you had an iPad, and now it's like you have all these in-between states, and one of those in-between states could very well be a 4K monitor.
That's another, well, here we go. We're not going to talk about what we didn't see. But, there's just so much out there. It's, again, another one of those times you feel like there may be a quantum jump coming.
Yeah.
It's just...
To me, this feels like a quantum jump. That, has been the best WWDC.
Yeah, but everybody has said something along those lines. To the developer world, this was just amazing.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging because that means that in a couple weeks, months, the benefits that we see here are going to wash out to the average user.
Totally permeate, and it will be... I mean, I'm always optimistic about the ecosystem, in part because I spend all day interacting with the community and people are releasing new and more interesting abstractions that mean that you as average developer don't have to go and learn like large fundamentals in order to pull something off.
Right.
Like that's what really works for me about this idea of a dependency manager. But as you get further and further and build more and more complex applications, I think all the new tools that we've been given now make it much easier to work on larger scale applications, doing more complex things, and that will mean, you know, someday maybe Xcode will be running on the iPad. I don't quite know the answer to these questions, but eventually we will be building extremely complex applications on these devices. And we already are now, but I think it's going to be a lot easier to do it in the future.
It's a very exciting time. There's no question.
Yeah.
And just the vibe here has been amazing. I mean, the response to AltConference has been amazing.
Yeah.
But the vibe after the keynote was like, wow, everybody was just ecstatic.
Yeah, totally. And to be honest, Swift for developers has just totally overshadowed everything else in that keynote. I've not had a discussion with anyone about the location, like dependent apps that when you're near your phone it'll switch to the Mac, etc., because all anyone wants to talk about is this language.
Right.
We don't even talk about Xcode. We only talk about the language. And the amount of time I've spent in this room sitting down with the book with 3 or 4 people just talking about individual aspects of it and how that works and how that could affect things on a longer term basis is, I don't know, it's hard to quantify, but it's just something that feels like such a substantial shift in our community that almost nothing else is important as that switch.
What you're seeing here, folks, is you're seeing a lot of passion. And that's been something that's been across the board to everybody I've talked to. They come away really passionate, no negative comments.
Yeah.
It's just, they can't wait to get back and start working on some of this stuff.
Totally.
So
it's like, I have my release schedule planned, and from after 2 months' time, I will start writing all new code in Swift, and then slowly integrating. And I don't know if I could rewrite my entire application, but over time, perhaps.
Where do we send people to learn more about you, CocoaPods, the whole bit?
So, CocoaPods.org is usually the best place. That's like our overview. It has the search for what's new. Okay. I'm Orta at it. You can find me at orta.github.io. And that just shows you some of my work, but it's not that interesting overall. And most importantly, you should follow me on Twitter.
There you go. There you go.
Orta, O-R-T-A.
Great. Orta, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for stopping by and giving the time.
Yeah.
Take care.
Enjoy.
Folks, we'll have more from the AltConference and WWDC in San Francisco. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.